Hello, today we're going to continue solving square root equations. In the last video, we already did some of these. What is a little bit different about some of these is that some of them, for instance, number 1, 2, and 3, start with a square root on both sides. As long as everything is inside a square root completely on both sides of the equation, the slightly different thing we're going to do here is we know that to get rid of one square root, we square root both sides. Same idea here. If I want to get rid of square roots on both sides, I can just square both sides and it will take care of both of them. So let's look at number 1 as an example. I want to undo the square root here. So I need to square this side of the equation. I also have another squared on the other side, and because I'm squaring one side, I have to square the other. So I'm going to square both sides of the equation. When I do that, square root and squared cancel on the left side and on the right side. And then what we have in blue looks like things you've been doing for a long time. It's an Algebra 1 problem at that point. We need to get our x's on the same side of the equation. So I'm choosing to subtract 9x from both sides. You could have done that a little differently. And then we need to get our numbers on the same side. So to undo this positive 9, I subtract 9 from both sides. 9 minus 9 is 0, which is okay. Don't let that throw you off. Last but not least, to get x completely by itself, I divide by the number in front of x. 0 divided by anything other than 0 is 0, so x equals 0. So just to reiterate, if we start with a square root on both sides, nothing happening outside the square root on either side, just start straight away with squaring both sides. That will end up canceling the square root on both sides, so then you end up with a nice, easy, manageable equation to solve from there. Let's try another one. So I have everything inside the left-hand side is in a square root, everything inside the right-hand side is in a square root. So to undo both those square roots, I'm going to square both sides. Root and squared cancel. Root and squared cancel. And then from here, I need to get the x's on the same side. I'm going to add x to both sides. 4x plus x is 5x. And then last but not least, to get rid of the number in front of x, I divide. X equals positive 1. Number 3 is the same starting scenario. We have everything on both sides of the equation inside a square root. So I can start by squaring both sides. Root and squared cancel. I end up with what's under the root. Same thing on the other side. We get our x's on the same side of the equation. I'm going to choose to subtract 2x from both sides. You could have done that the other way, that's fine. From there, since I got x's on the left side, I need to get numbers on the right side, so I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. And then divide to get x completely by itself. 10 divided by 5 is negative 2, so x is negative 2. The rest of these look more like what we saw in the last video. If you have something to undo outside of the root, make sure you undo that first. Then you can square both sides. So in number 4, I have that minus sign happening, minus 8 happening outside of the square root. I need to undo that first by adding 8 to both sides. Negative 7 plus 8 is 1. I still have the root stuff. These 8s are gone now, though. To undo that root, I square, which means I have to square the other side too. 1 squared is 1 times 1, which is 1. The square and the root cancel each other out, so I'm left with what was under the root on the other side. Add 29 to undo minus 29. And then divide both sides by 3. We end up with x equals 10. Number 5, there's nothing happening outside of the root, so I don't need to do like I did here and add 8 or anything like that to start. Since everything on the left-hand side is inside a root, I can start by squaring. Make sure I square the other side too. Root and squared cancel, so I'm left with the under the root stuff on the left-hand side. Right-hand side, 5 squared is 5 times 5, so 25. From there, solve it like usual. Add 5 to both sides to undo minus 5. And then divide by the number in front of x. We end up with x equals negative 6. Last one. So for this last one, I have something happening outside of the root. I have a plus 4 on the outside of the root. I undo that by doing the opposite, which is subtracting 4. 12 minus 4 is 8. From here, now that I have everything inside the right-hand side inside the right-hand side inside a square root, I square to undo that square root. Make sure you square the other side also. 8 squared is 8 times 8, so 64. Root and squared cancel each other out. I'll scroll here to give myself a little bit more room. And now solve for b. Subtract 4. And then finish off by dividing by negative 15. When you do your division, you should end up with negative 4 for v. So again, to solve square root equations, somewhere in that process you will need to square both sides. If you have both sides of the equation inside square roots to start with, you'll start by squaring both sides. If you have nothing happening outside of the root on the one side, you also start by squaring both sides. If there is something to be undone outside the root, like an addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, make sure you undo that first. Once you've taken care of that and taken care of your squaring, it's like solving a regular equation that you've been doing for a very long time. That is it. Have a fantastic day.